Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is the 155th episode of Tones Takes, and let me just start with this. The Supreme Court ruling in the cake versus the gay couple, the baker of Masterpiece Cake Shop, the 7-2 decision in favor of this baker. I don't think it was a victory for him. I'm sorry, Jack, but I don't think it really was a victory. If you haven't followed, Jack Phillips came under fire way back in 2012 when he decided that he was not going to bake a special cake for this gay couple here, David Mullins and Charlie Craig, where in Colorado there is a anti-discriminatory act that says, you can't do that, Mr. Jack Phillips. You have to basically do whatever they want, even if it goes against your religious preferences. The Colorado Anti-Discriminatory Act in itself actually says it is a discriminatory practice and unlawful for a person directly and indirectly to refuse, withhold from, or deny to an individual or group because of disability, race, creed, color, sex, sexual orientation, marital status, national origin, or ancestry the full and equal enjoyment of the goods, services, facilities, privileges, advantages, or accommodations of a place of public accommodation. And that is a lot to say that, Jack, you were in the wrong. And in this, what I'm reading basically is the opinion of the court, which was written by Justice Kennedy, and it was basically co-signed by 6 of the other justices, with 2 dissenting. And I'll get to that later, because that in itself is a really important point that I really want to touch on. But basically, it just tells me that, hey, Jack, you were in the wrong. According to the state, the act defines public accommodation broadly to include any place of business engaged in any sales to the public and any place offering services to the public, and it excludes a church, a synagogue, a mosque, or other places that are principally used for religious purposes, which the last time I checked, a cake shop is not. So this went through the Colorado courts, it went to the civil courts and civil rights and all things, and finally made it to the Supreme Court, where the ACLU was really hoping for a victory. Unfortunately, it didn't get that victory, but again, I still see it as, hey, this is a victory, and it's because of the way that this whole vote went down. And let me just get to that real quick, because he's all smiles here, but I don't think this is going to be a victory. Basically, what the Supreme Court did is they just pretty much kicked this thing down the road. They gave it back to the state, and they said, come back to us when you're not so anti-religious in your ruling. If you read Justice Kennedy's opinion, I'll read some of it, because out of this almost 60 pages of everyone's opinion, I made like 19 pages in most of Kennedy's. And if you go to courts, there's a wonderful breakdown of how pretty much everyone kind of voted and who co-signed with who. But I'm just going to give a quick summary of starting with what Justice Kennedy here mainly said. And he said, the neutral and respectful consideration to which Phillips, the baker, was entitled was compromised. The Civil Rights Commission treatment of this case has some elements of a clear and impermissible hostility toward the sincere religious beliefs that motivated Phillips' objection to baking a cake in the first place. And then he goes on to even quote some of what the commission said. And they basically said, one thing, if a businessman wants to do business in the state and he's got an issue with the laws impacting his personal belief system, he needs to look at being able to compromise. But then it got even worse than that. People in the commission said, I would also like to reiterate that what we said in a previous hearing, freedom of religion and religion has been used to justify all kinds of discrimination throughout history, whether it be slavery, whether it be the Holocaust. And then he said, whether it be hundreds of situations where freedom of religion has been used to justify discrimination. And to me, I'm like, whoa. You can't compare. I mean, this baker is not Adolf Hitler, and he's certainly not some slave owner. I wouldn't even want to think that he would, that he is discriminatory, but maybe he is, maybe he's not. But that's not up for them to describe, and it's certainly not up for them, because this next sentence really threw me off, and I think that's what threw the 7 justices that came to Phillips' side. Is basically, this guy says, that this commissioner says, to me, it's one of the most despicable pieces of rhetoric that people can use to use their religion to hurt others. And Justice Kennedy says to describe a man's faith as one of the most despicable pieces of rhetoric that people can use is to disparage his religion in at least two distinct ways, by describing it as despicable and also by characterizing it as merely rhetorical, something insubstantial and even insincere, which in this Baker's case, he was very sincere. If you read some of the opening of this Supreme Court decision, they talk about how this guy opened this bake shop and he wanted it to be, to be able to serve Christians, different things of that nature. So he's very sincere. And so I really like that what Justice Kennedy said in his remarks, but I still think this is a victory for the gay couple, because what Justice Kennedy is basically saying here is, I still support gay marriage in a way, hence the rainbow in the background, but I also support that Jack Phillips deserves to have a more fair trial where he doesn't have people attacking his religion. So basically, Colorado, y'all need to just do your homework a little bit more, do still vote in favor of the gay couple, but don't make it so much as an attack on religion. That's what I got from this. The other thing that I really got from this is the dissenting opinion, which Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Queen Ginsburg, wrote. And I'll look at the court's little infographic here. Basically, Ginsburg says the majority is making false comparisons between bakers who refuse to create specific cakes with an offensive message and a refusal based on homosexual identity, which, again, they talked about in many of this in this case, how there were other bakers who were approached with making anti-gay cakes, and they said no, because that's hateful, and the commission in Colorado agreed with them. And so why wouldn't they agree with this baker? And so that's why Ruth Bader Ginsburg is saying, you know what, no, I'm going to be in the dissent, and also Sonia Sotomayor agree with her. But the most important vote and opinion that I found here came from Justice Clarence Thomas, that devilish grin there. And the court's article here says, Thomas argues that the least popular opinion should be protected under the First Amendment, and that the refusal to bake for a same-sex wedding could certainly qualify because it's outside the new orthodoxy. Basically, he's saying that religion is being pushed to the fringes of society, and so it should get the most protections under the First Amendment. And I found it interesting because if you look at Clarence Thomas's religious background, he was raised Catholic. He considered entering the priesthood as early as the age of 16, and he was the first black student to attend St. John Vianney's Minor Seminary, which is in Savannah on the Isle of Hope. So he is a very religious person, so I was not surprised to see his decision, but I think his decision was the most important because he's basically still arguing that religion should trump all of this stuff, even though you have the other justices really not trying to play the side of whose freedom of speech is more important, religious freedom of speech or LGBTQ and everything else freedom of speech. And so that's what's really at play here. But at the end of the day, I still believe that Jack Phillips is going to lose this case, and that it's basically just going to come to Colorado to come up with some other way, some other more creative way to say this is why you can't discriminate against these people, and they can't just come at his religion so hard. So I'd like to know everyone else's thoughts about this. In the end, if you're going to have a company and you're going to serve the public, you have to be open to everybody. I don't think you can discriminate, because if that's the case, then we wouldn't have abolished Jim Crow laws in the first place. We wouldn't have gotten rid of separate but equal. Basically, it would have said, well, if you're a white business owner and you want to have a separate facility for blacks to go to the bathroom, then by all means do that, because you truly believe that that is appropriate. And that's not the case. So if I'm to say that that shouldn't be the case, I can also say that because of my religious preferences, I should be able to not bake a cake for a lesbian couple or a Muslim couple or someone against my beliefs. I run a public company. Now, if I had a private company, or if I was doing something privately and I wasn't, under some strict code of law, then that would be a completely different story. But I would love to get everyone else's opinions on this, because this is definitely going to be one of the linchpin arguments for the Supreme Court for probably the next 50 years, because it's just going to happen. So I would love to hear what other people have to say. That's my take on this story, and I will see you all tomorrow. Peace.